Hello, everyone. I hope this minute gives time for everyone to join us. I am going to start slowly. Don't worry. We will have time to get into the details of the declaration. I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And warmest welcome to everyone who is joining us from all over the world. We have many participants, close to 300, I think, joining us today. And of course, we are launching the ALBA Declaration, that it's one of the most important deliverables from the ALBA Network. And although today is time to focus on the ALBA Declaration, as the chair of the ALBA Network, I would like to take a couple of minutes to briefly introduce the network. First, a couple of words about the name ALBA. Because I think it reflects very well the mission and the vision of this network. ALBA means sunrise in several languages, and that's the idea behind the ALBA network. We have the ambition to be this emerging energy that helps catalyzing this promising movement, this opening movement that we are currently living in the world towards a definitive change. We want to make sure that with this network, we take the necessary steps so that we make a definitive change so that all brain scientists will have equal opportunities to thrive. And I say brain scientists, but of course, many of the actions go beyond neuroscience. The network itself was created in 2018 around the FENS Forum in Berlin. And since then, in this a bit more than 2.5 years, it's been expanding in scope and breadth, but always committed to supporting and advocating for actions and policies towards equity, diversity, and inclusion. And also, it's the mission is quite international, if you want. We aim to cover the globe. The goals of, or the main goals of the network is promoting best practices, and that's why we're here today, to see what we are doing in this domain. Recognizing outstanding contributions to science and diversity, providing networking and mentoring opportunities. Activities, we have a growing list of activities. I'm not going to go through all of them. I invite you to visit our website where there are important resources, also video clips, and also important information that I think it's quite interesting to see. We are here today to learn more about the declaration that is being launched today, Declaration for the Best Practices. Of course, we're going to be talking about it. And before that, I'm going to thank our funding partners, FENS, IBRO, and SFN, and our supporting partner, the Brain Prize. And we thank them very much for valuable contributions, without which the network activities wouldn't really be possible at all. We also thank our collaborating organizations, very particularly the FENS Catholic Network and Young IBRO, with whom we partner very deeply. Also, we partner with many other organizations like Women in Neuroscience, Black in Neuro, Queer in Neuro, FONA, FOUNS, FALAN, Neurofem India, Federation Wallonie Bruxelles, ABBS, CCMP, Hellenic Neuroscience Society, and more recently we connected with World Women in Neuroscience and hope to collaborate very soon. There are many people to thank here, starting by all the members, everyone joining, and also everyone that's contributed to the declaration, particularly the declaration working group, and particularly also the chair that is here, Megan Carey, and we'll be talking very soon. But I also want to thank very especially the members of the ALBA office, Matilde and Lorian, for a very impressive work, and also for having organized this event and also the launch of the declaration so effectively. Thanks so much. Thank everyone joining. Follow us in social media, and also register as an ALBA network member. There is no fee, and there are many advantages. And networking is, I think, a very important aspect of working in sciences. So join us and network and participate. And if you want to contribute, you can also contribute as a volunteer, and that's something you can find in the website. Now, before we pass to the next part, I would like to briefly, because there are many organizations, display the names of the institutions that have already joined as the early signatories. And we have already 167 organizations. And without further doing, I would like now to introduce Megan Carey from the Champalimau Center of the North in Lisbon, Portugal. Megan.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm really happy to be here today to present the ALBA Declaration on Equity and Inclusion. I wanted to first give a sense of the motivation and the history of this document. And it really began in February of 2019, when we had a planning meeting to plan out the central actions of ALBA, which was a very new organization at that time. And we had the idea that we want to crystallize many ideas that had already become part of mainstream thinking on equity, diversity, and inclusion in many places of the world, but were really still controversial in other places. And we wanted to create a document that would serve several purposes. We wanted it to recognize persistent inequities as in representation and as a given, and not get stuck trying to prove them again and again and again. We wanted a document that would be actionable. And so we aimed to compile a collection of immediate actions people could take. And we wanted these actions to be evidence-based and also impactful. We wanted them to be positive, and we wanted the declaration to focus on what individuals and organizations can do, not what they should do. We wanted the declaration to serve as a resource, both for organizations and for individuals who wanted to improve equity, inclusivity, and diversity in their communities. Today, we're really thrilled to have already over 160 institutional signatories, but I want to stress that the relevance of the declaration for individuals is really important. Too often, the burden of constant education and explanation on these issues falls upon members, underrepresented groups themselves. And so in addition to serving as a resource, we hoped that the declaration would also empower individuals by providing something concrete that we can all point to when leaders within organizations or people who call themselves allies say that they want to help, but they just don't know what to do. We also felt that it was important that the declaration be for a global audience. And I want to highlight the fact that in the end, the declaration is really a quite general document. It doesn't address specifics of various underrepresented groups. It's also not particularly specific to any field. It's not even specific in its wording to brains, rather for science in general. And although that we've had a lot of discussions with many groups, and there was some feeling that the document should do more to address specifics of the differences that we do recognize exist in the history and the manifestation of bias against specific groups. However, our decision to stay more general was very intentional because we recognize that there are problems with equitable representation around the entire world. These differences in different across countries and often across fields and subfields, but in many ways, the barriers are really strikingly similar. And we wanted the declaration to be as widely applicable as possible, so we've decided to focus on shared underlying issues. The process of drafting the declaration had a few stages. The basic structure emerged from a series of meetings within the ALBA team, particularly the Declaration Working Group, and also among the Fens-Cavley Network scholars. In these discussions, it became clear that the desire for universal relevance meant that we needed to focus on universal barrier. And the two themes that kept emerging were the themes of implicit bias and also workplace culture. So those discussions led to a document. Of course, the COVID pandemic presented difficulties for finalizing the declaration last year. Also made the declaration itself much more urgent in many of our eyes. We've all seen again and again, not just in the scientific community, but in society at large, the many ways that this pandemic has profoundly exacerbated existing inequalities. So we've decided to then finalize the declaration by email, circulating drafts among the ALBA team, ALBA partners, including FENS, EBRO, SFN, Black and Neuro, Queer and Neuro, and others, to finalize both the scope and the language of the declaration. So we're not showing the declaration on the screen, but everybody can find it at alba.network/declaration. And if you haven't seen it yet, the main points are two. The first point is to acknowledge that we are all biased and give some suggestions on what we can do to overcome these biases. They include highlights like, first of all, of course, don't ignore the problem. We need to acknowledge our biases and commit to overcoming them. And a key aspect here is to have very explicit goals and policies. We can also advocate for our marginalized colleagues, nominate them for awards and leadership roles. We all need to take a hard look at our assessment practices. And in the declaration, we have some specific suggestions to help everybody watch out our biased expectations. The second main part of the declaration seems like a simple statement, which is just that inclusive workplace cultures are good for everyone. And there's a lot of content of the declaration that is aimed at ways that we can improve workplace culture in order to make healthy research environments. We've received a lot of questions as to why we cover so much about workplace culture that might not seem immediately directly relevant for diversity, because these issues came up again and again as being central to the lived experience of underrepresented individuals. And I think the bottom line is that a healthy workplace culture clearly benefits everyone, but an unhealthy one often disproportionately affects marginalized groups. So that's also why we link to statements on research and assessment, because those issues again came up repeatedly as essential components of inclusive environments. We also decided to integrate references to the DORA Declaration on Research Assessment and the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity, whose structures incidentally had also served as a model for our own efforts. So the idea in establishing inclusive workplace cultures, our suggestions include things like committing to establishing positive environments by having clear policies, also making sure that expectations for career advancement and recognition for service contributions are adequate, promoting healthy work-life balance. I just want to end by saying that we know language on equity, diversity, and inclusion issues can often be very controversial. And we also want to point out that usages differ around the world. So we tried to be as non-controversial as we could with the language. Our goal, of course, was to create an inclusive document on inclusivity. And in order to do that, we integrated feedback from dozens of stakeholders that was often contradictory, especially on precise, sensitive wordings. So we've done our best to draft a document that's both impactful, realizing that in many cases we will have failed on one or both fronts. So while we recognize that the declaration is not comprehensive and it is not perfect, we hope that it's a start. And I hope I've given you a sense of what we hope we can achieve together with your help now that we have released the Declaration on Equity and Inclusivity. Thank you very much. And now, sorry, I would like to introduce Dr. Tracy Bale from the University of Maryland. She is the current EBRO president.
Thank you, Dr. Carey, and thank you, Dr. Sandi, for both of you for all the hard work that you have done. For Dr. Sandi for really kicking off what is such an important aspect globally. And Dr. Carey for all the hard work that you've put into this declaration on throughout the holidays, browbeating everybody to get this done. So as president of EBRO, which is the International Brain Research Organization, I want to first welcome everybody to this important moment. And I want to take stock, and I want everyone to take stock, all 214 participants that are on right now in this moment, and thank everybody for participating, for logging in this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are around the globe, to be part of this moment that is so critically valuable that we declare together, not just making a statement, which we do all the time, but as Dr. Carey pointed out, we take action. And I think you're going to hear from the panelists today how important those action items really are. And I know everybody out there is anxious to determine how they can participate. Brain Research Organization, or EBRO, has been around for over 60 years, and we support neuroscience research training around the globe, including financial support of ALBA, as Dr. Sandi pointed out. And EBRO stands firm in our support of ALBA's mission and very much in support of this declaration. And we encourage all of you to take part in action, as you will hear from the panelists today, in ensuring that we have equity and diversity in everything that we do, in every part of our lives, and especially in our professional lives, related to our teaching commitments, our research programs, the committee work that we do, whether it be meeting planning, any aspect that we do where we are in a position by which we can hold somebody up and make sure that they are acknowledged and included. And that we don't just say the words, that we actually put some action behind them, and that inclusivity and awareness of the benefits, as Dr. Carey just highlighted, that diversity really brings us all to the table, and that those ideas that are shared benefit all of us. Recent events in the United States and around the globe have highlighted that there are aspects of racism that are still very much present in our society. And we all have experienced, whether from marginalized groups in our communities, that aspect only serves to divide us and make the workplace culture very non-beneficial to the research that we all do. So I want to take this moment again to make everybody think, listen, and participate in action items of this declaration. And to again thank Dr. Sandi for all of the work that she has put into ALBA, that this has grown enormously from where it began over a very fast period of time due to her hard work. And again, to Megan for the hard work on this declaration, and to say that EBRO as an international organization stands firm in our support of equity, inclusion, and by equity meaning access as well as the availability of resources around the globe. We have regional committees that are inclusive of all neuroscience research from every continent around the globe, and EBRO supports, and as Dr. Carey pointed out, that the needs and the resource availability is different around the globe, and that is something that EBRO is very aware of and supportive of. So with that, I want to again thank you all for participating. We're now at 215 participants, so thank you all for joining. And I want to introduce Dr. Laura Andreae from King's College, and she is going to run the panel, and she is also on the subcommittee of SFN for diversity and inclusion. Laura?
Thank you very much indeed. So it's now a really great pleasure to welcome all of you to our panel discussion, and indeed to welcome our fantastic panel. I just want to remind you, some of you have cottoned onto this already, that we are running questions in the Q&A panel, and please feel free to start adding your questions now as you think about them, and hopefully we'll have time for as many questions as possible. So what we're going to do for this panel discussion is each of our panelists has been asked to pick one or maybe two action items from the declaration and give an example from their own experience of that particular action item. And so I'm going to introduce them each in turn. So firstly, we have Professor Yasmin Hurd. She's a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and is the Ward Coleman Chair in Translational Neuroscience and the Director of the Addiction Institute at Mount Sinai. There's lots of very, very impressive accreditations. And so Yasmin, I'd love you just to tell us which action points you picked and go ahead with your examples.
Yeah, it's really an honor. And I echo everything that Dr. Bale has said, Dr. Sandi, and Dr. Carey. I think that this is such a pivotal moment in history, and it's amazing to join this group. I mean, my action point is relevant to the declaration, is about recognizing and counteracting bias, which to me is closely linked to establishing work groups. It takes courageous leaders to prioritize and proactively support, provide the support that's needed to enact change. And with work groups, it's really critical to develop roadmaps that establishes the priorities and the process to address the racism and the bias that has maintained or continued to impact on the reduction, the inequities, I should say, of women underrepresented groups to succeed in STEM. And so at my institution at Mount Sinai, for example, we created a race, and that task force, as said, developed a roadmap for establishing the priorities. It was really clear that it was important to include everyone at the table, because without having everyone sharing in the process, it then makes the community, it has negative outcomes. And I think that, you know, one of the things that was really clear is that when people feel threatened because there's not transparency of a system, and when everyone, if we had students, both medical and graduate students, we had junior faculty, we had senior faculty, we had high leadership, without that buy-in from everyone, you're not going to develop a positive environment and really address the issues that needs to be addressed. Also, the work group, you know, we all don't have time. And so when a lot of times people develop these work groups and you put everybody on there, but there has to be a governance and an organization for the structured participation. People have to have a buy-in. And if the buy-in in terms of their time commitment, so we all want to do things, but we can all come in at different levels. So the work group really has to, as I said, have a governance and a structure depending on the time commitment each member can really have. And I mean, the policies must be clear. And an important thing about these actionable items that these work groups develop, it's really important to know what the problem is. And around the world, and even within the US and different institutions, there are actually different problems. We definitely know there are global problems of bias, but without knowing your current state and the problem within the data that within your organization, it's impossible to really develop solutions. So a lot of times people focus on superficial issues rather than directly addressing the core problems. So developing, you know, we're all scientists, use the data. What is it specific to your organization? That's really critical. Also, one thing that people do is that they set very diffuse goals. And they set goals sometimes that, yes, will we eventually get there, that we will have equity one day? I hope so. I hope so in my lifetime. However, without setting concrete goals that are have immediate, short-term and long-term goals, we will not get there. You really need to make sure that there are actionable points at each step. There has to be immediate changes, intermediate changes, and long-term changes. And for all of these, without measurable outcomes, we continue down the same line. So there has to be a system that's set up for accountability, and accountability that definitely incentivize also and track, you know, these equitable successes, and also where the needs are for improvement. We're not going to say that everything is going to improve overnight, but there has to be accountability and incentivizing. And importantly, the communication and transparency, there must be for these work groups a transparency that, again, everyone in the community understands and knows what's happening. It's not that they go in a dark room and then come back out with this one document. If there's not a bi-directional communication, again, the success of what you're doing not really get implemented in the way that you want. So for me, this work group has to be sustainable. So a lot of times we say, okay, we create work groups, but without sustainability, things with with dedicated staff and with the institutional support to provide that power with a direct line to the leadership, again, the work groups will not be successful. So that's some of my thoughts about the actions that could be taken for that declaration point.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. Lots of food for thought there. So it's great, we're getting lots of questions in the Q&A, so keep them coming. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Stephen Carey. He is the Assistant Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, as well as being a Professor of Structural Biology at Imperial in the UK. And he's also been the chair and one of the architects of the Declaration of Research Assessment, or DORA, as it's well known, which is one of the things that we modeled the ALBA Declaration on in terms of the concept. And so, Stephen, if you'd like to tell us the action point you picked and your example.
Sure. Thank you very much, Laura, for that introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be able to participate in this panel today. And I just want to start off by saying I agree with every single word that Yasmin said, about all of the actions and approaches that need to be taken. And speaking as chair of the Declaration on Research Assessment, I can tell you that declarations are not enough to change the world. And at DORA, we're very much focused now on practical actions, and I'm very pleased to see that the ALBA Declaration takes a very similar approach, and is really trying to think through what it is that needs to be done. The particular action that I really want to focus on is around being data-driven. And we have a lot of experience of this in many universities in the UK, because we make extensive use of external benchmarking schemes to test ourselves. So for example, the Athena Swan to look at gender equality, the Race Equality Charter to look at race equality, for example, and there are even other schemes that look at LGBTQ+ experiences and the experiences of disabled staff and students. Now, these schemes are often controversial because they are seen as immensely bureaucratic and regarded by many as tick box exercises. And I think they do run the risk of becoming such exercises because actually they do involve an immense amount of work, but they are still immensely valuable, I think, because they oblige you to look at your data. And I think the data are absolutely essential here. We can all sort of, make stories about, our impressions of what's going on, but until you actually look at the numbers, then I don't think you really know. And I'm very aware of this, particularly myself, because we are in the final month of preparing our submission for the Race Equality Charter. And that has required us to look at all our staff numbers, academics and professional staff, and all our student numbers, both undergraduates and postgraduates. We have to look at recruitment. We have to look at promotions. We have to look at how we admit students, who gets a first class or upper second class degree, who goes on into sort of professional jobs. So there's an immense amount of data, and it has been an immense amount of work. And so I would encourage organizations signing up to this declaration not to underestimate how much work this is going to be, and to make sure that you operationalize it. You basically have to build it into the core of your operations. You should be gathering this data annually, because it's important, first of all, to find out where you are and where the challenges are. At Imperial, we see we have a very particular challenge in terms of race equality, in terms of underrepresentation of Black staff and students, and that's something that we will be focusing on in terms of our action plan. But of course, the data is also important then for testing whether or not the actions that you take are having the effect that you want. As Yasmin said, we're scientists, okay? We should be data driven. We can propose a hypothesis, we can try something out, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, then if we're monitoring the data, we know that actually we should stop doing that and try something else instead. So data is really, really important, but data is not the only thing, because you can, and I have found myself, you end up getting a bit data blind and you can't think about anything else. And it's, as well as looking at the numbers, it's really important to unearth the lived experiences of staff, particularly from underrepresented groups, from women, from racial minorities, and to open up dialogue within the institution so that the questions of equality are discussed, becomes part of the norm of discussion. And it's particularly important to engage the majority, which tends not to have had these experiences. So people like myself, white heterosexual men, okay, at the university is still probably the dominant group in many countries, and to normalize those discussions and to recognize that there are power dynamics that may inhibit people from speaking, and to try and identify those and neutralize them. And so there are actions, I think, that need to be taken around that. So with that, I'll close my remarks. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. The importance of data, but it's not enough. Okay, so next up, we have Professor Diane Lipscombe. She is the director of the Carney Institute for Brain Science at Brown University. And Diane, would you like to go ahead with your example?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. It's a real thrill to be on the panel. I'm going to just talk quickly so that I can get in as much information as I can, but very happy to address questions afterwards, as we all are. So just, kicking off after Stephen's discussion about data, why don't I just start with some data? So 2019 to 2020, the report from the American Association of University Professors shows that men are 2 times more likely to be in full professor positions compared to women. And this disparity is reduced at entry level, at the assistant professor level, and it's flipped for non-tenure track lecturer positions. The pay gap between men and women persists, Women full professors earn about 13% less than their peer male colleagues at the full professor level. That's actually a difference on average of $25,000 a year for professors in the Northeast of the United States. And these data are even more stark for persons excluded from the academy due to ethnicity and race. So that's my kind of opening comment. There are a large number of data from a number of different universities supporting the inequities that arise from a number of different factors here. So what do we do about this? And I think a number of us have really been thinking very deeply, and I'm now referring to kind of point 2 within the declaration, which is around selection and hiring, balanced committees and choice of evaluation criteria related to the hiring process. So there's too much to say in this short time period, but I'm going to post some resources in the chat to everybody. And I'm really leaning on the kinds of work that I've been doing at Brown University. And I just want to do a big call out for Dr. Shantae Delalue, who's our Vice President for Institutional Equity and Diversity at Brown. And her team has posted a really fantastic resource, which I'll give in the chat, about things that you should be thinking about in terms of recruitment and fairness in recruitment. But key, all the work and most of the work, I would say like at least 50% of the work goes on before the recruitment, before you announce anything, before you do the job announcement. Who are the voting faculty? Are they buying in? What are the priorities? Is diversity a priority? How do you set that as a priority? How do you get the right pool of applicants applying for your job? If you don't have the pool, you're going to be disappointed with the outcome. So thinking about what are you putting in the ad? Who are you posting the ad to? How broadly are you doing your outreach? Who's on the search committee? Has the search committee had good training? Are they aware of implicit biases when they look at references? And I'm going to give a couple of quick examples, but I just want to complete this, very quick examples. I just want to complete this kind of thought process. I'll give you one example in my own personal experience. Yep, great. I was in an interview and it got completely taken over by one faculty member who totally took all of my time in my interview. You can't allow that to happen. You have to have a set of clear criteria, questions that you're going to ask, treat everyone fairly, set your priorities. And then I would just really strongly recommend when you do a recruitment, treat everyone the same, give people the same salary, the same resources, the same startup as everybody else, because doing a recruitment isn't the end, it's the beginning. And that's your beginning as a responsibility as a faculty member to support your colleagues. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Diane. Okay, and finally, last but certainly not least, I am delighted to introduce Dr. Michelle Jones-London, who is the Chief of the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity at NIH, NINDS, and has been working in this field for many, many years, and with a whole bunch of extremely high-profile diversity initiatives. So, Michelle, would you like to give your example?
Thank you for that intro. You know, it's really great to go last because you could pull all the threads together. I think in terms of, you know, the homework assignment we had in terms of what in the declaration spoke to us, for me, it definitely was the bullet about establishing a mentoring system. To me, what a lot of the issues and the problems, we can talk about recruitment, but we also need to talk about retention, right? And a lot of that is really treating this issue not just about diversity by the numbers, but really getting to that part when it comes to inclusion. One of the favorite quotes that I love is, inclusion is about experiences, not demographics. It's about being confident enough in a space to share your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, and to have them actually heard in a meaningful way. And what I see from where I sit in a federal agency is that for many of our programs, you know, a lot of where it falls down is a lack of mentorship. It's a lack of sponsorship, really having meaningful relationships with mentees to really help them to get those connections and to go to that next step. And unfortunately, what we see is for underrepresented groups and marginalized groups, you know, no surprise here, they tend to suffer even more from that lack of connection and mentorship and just power to move to that next step. And so at our institute and throughout several of the other neuroscience institutes, what we've sought to create as an example of what you can do as an action is sort of these mentoring hubs. So creating networks, mentorship, development. One perfect example is, you know, as we're at the Connectome, is the Neuroscience Scholars Program that we fund with SFN, but we also have several others like Brains, Minds, and Transcends at AAN, where we really seek to provide that supportive network, not only peer-to-peer, but also creating avenues where people can feel seen, feel heard, feel recognized, if not at their own institution, but through this national network. I think that's really important in terms of translating these words of, you know, these aspirational words into, like I said, the next step is with forming these relationships and really investing in the people. You know, we heard something yesterday. There was a moderated by Dr. Marlin, where people shared their stories of their journeys, very accomplished doctors who, even though they made it successfully, all along that pathway, you heard the failure of true mentorships and true mentorship and true advocacy for them. And so even though they've made it, it was really heartbreaking to hear at what cost to just dealing with just, I mean, there's no better word to say it, just nonsense that was unnecessary. And so hopefully this document will spur people on to think about specifically those personal relationships and improving mentorship in a meaningful way. And I'll leave it there to take Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle, and excellent timing. Okay, so we've now got time for some Q&A, and please keep putting your questions in the Q&A chat. So perhaps we'll kick off. So there are a few questions. I was just saying there are a few questions that are maybe best answered at the end by Megan when she speaks. But we have a question from Aniko Kurosi, who says, I agree with accountability for action aspect, but this is often difficult to achieve, which I think we probably all agree with. Has anyone got some concrete examples about how to do this? Does anyone want to answer that question? Or maybe Yasmin, do you want to? Okay, Stephen, okay, go ahead.
Well, I think accountability starts from the very top of the organization. So, I mean, I'm based at a university. So unless your senior leadership team is behind you on this, then it's not even worth starting. So I think real leadership has to come from the top. Work on equity, diversity, and inclusion has to be seen as an institutional priority and something that the whole organization seeks to commit to embedding in all of its operations. And I mean, at Imperial, the view I have taken and the way that I've written our strategy is that progress towards equality, diversity, and inclusion is the responsibility of everyone at the organization. It's not something that you just devolve to a working group or a committee that you set up and then nobody else has to think about it. I think the message has to come from the leadership that this is a shared responsibility of the whole organization.
I agree. And I also think that this moment in history, though, we have the power to really push for accountability. All these organizations, I'm sure everyone that's part of this, who's participating, their universities, their institutions have all said, now is the time that they all throw out the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. They all want to be part of that. So in order for us to hold them, we hold them accountable. So any organization signing on with ALBA, they, the faculty, all the members of their institution who are ALBA members will push them. We can't have people saying that they adopt ALBA's declaration and their support, yet still they don't actually do this at their institution. We are now in a position to really hold a mirror up to all of these organizations, and that's how we push for accountability. I think I completely agree with Stephen, like our racism task force, it comes from the leadership, it comes from the dean, it comes from the CEO, however, and it's everybody's involved, but we are now holding them accountable. So whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through, do they get invited to certain organizations? Do they get invited to certain XYZ? We now must use this moment for our voices to really push for accountability.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So we have, there's another question from Zoe Hewitt, who says, he's got a question about the data. So do you have an understanding of the data lag between kicking off an initiative and seeing an impact? We see so much year-on-year variation due to small numbers, particularly when looking at race, that it's difficult to see the true impact. So, how do we assess the data, and do we worry about the time lag? How do we know when what we're doing is actually having an impact? Does anyone want to take that? Diane?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of ways to answer that question. One is that there's always going to be a data lag. There's an outcome lag. But, and so the important thing there is to just continue. When you start an initiative, you set up, you have a set of criteria, you have some realistic objectives, and then you just keep tracking. and you keep asking, are we meeting where we thought we were going to be? If not, why not? And continue not to fool yourselves about how well you're doing, but actually focus on the data again, and do climate surveys, and do a bunch of other things, and listen to what you don't want to hear. Like you just have to be really open-minded, and you may have the best plan laid out, but actually it's not hitting the right mark, like that you just missed something. And so be super willing to really question yourselves, and question your group, and question your team, just as we do in science. It's not so very different, actually. So that's one. The other is just to quickly say that the data lag is also super depressing. And I don't think it's a lag. I just think that we put a lot of focus in certain areas, and NIH has been fantastic around this. But they have an unbelievable, and maybe Michelle's going to say, a tracking system. And then they're just like seeing this humongous gap in another area where they've not got programs. And so now they shift and say, well, we need a program here at this transition point. So I think that I've been super depressed, as we all have, about the disparities in recruitment. Full professor level is the data that I mentioned. We're still not, the gains are tiny. And it's even worse when you think about, people who are traditionally excluded because of race and ethnicity. It's worse there. So things aren't just, we're missing some action steps that just have to be taken. We're not bringing along enough people in the process. And we've just got to dig in deep and just keep saying, what are we missing? What are we not doing? You don't just end, you don't just end with recruitment, as I said. It's the beginning. Mentorship is every single hour, every single day, and not just at those transition points. And so I just think we've got to dig in, and we've got to roll up our sleeves, and we've just got to keep trying, because what we're doing right now is working in some points, but not through the trajectory of the academia. And yeah, there's work to be done.
Thanks, Diane. So we don't have, so Michelle, I was going to, I think we don't have much time. There was just one, I thought there would be one last question, which I was going to direct to you, Michelle, so maybe you can add in whatever you were going to say, which is, we've had a question from Joanne Kenny, who says, what advice do you have for new equality, diversity, and inclusion organizations starting up? So maybe you can have the last word on that, and you can add in anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I would weave that in. I was just going to say everything Diane said, I agree with. And it's really, we were trained for this moment as scientists. There really is no different, right? In terms of not changing variables midstream and having the patience to see an intervention or an experiment through. This is what we were trained to do, but somehow we forget that piece of it when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The patience that we exude for development and trying to find cures, in fact, that's a longer road than in terms of trying to have equitable policies and practices for underrepresented groups. That's actually more achievable. And in terms of establishing an organization, I think you have to go in with that, knowing that you have to be in for the long game. And that, you know, to Yasmin's point, or Dr. Hurd's point, where she talked about having the resources around it too. It's not magic, right? You can't just want to do it in, you know, snap. There are resources involved with actually making a change. And then finally, you know, the other theme about integration, you know, I talk about this all the time. If you're serious about this work, it's a casserole. It isn't the peas on the side that you get to decide what you're going to eat or not eat. It is embedded in everything you do. And if you take all of that into account, yes, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be, you know, tomorrow, but we didn't get here, you know, overnight either. So the work, if you really want to do it, it can happen. And I think, you know, right now, it's just the perfect timing for this, right? It is all eyes, all resources. And sometimes we talk about, you know, we question people's motives for wanting to make the changes. I say, don't even worry about that. Take advantage of whatever it is, whether it's, you know, they're doing it because it's the fad. It doesn't matter, because usually in these organizations and environments are people who have been advocates, allies for a long time and are waiting for this spotlight to be able to have that energy and the momentum to go to that next step. And that's what I really liked about the declaration. It talked about a catalytic change, right? And that's action. This won't happen by osmosis.
Thanks. So there you go. So my extremely poor reading of the time is that in fact we do have more time for questions. So I'm going to move on to some of the other questions. We've had several questions about outreach, and in particular at what level, educational level, we should target, particularly maybe the more junior levels, so underrepresented groups at low, what someone said, Mary Pearson said, lower educational levels or earlier stages of education. I wondered if anyone has any views about, you know, that aspect of targeting.
Go ahead, Yasmin. Sorry, ladies first.
Oh no, I didn't see anyone starting. No, I mean, I think that this has to be multi-pronged at every level. We absolutely want to change. We must change. I shouldn't say want to. We must change the education of STEM in our society. I think STEM is taught in a way that does not bring more people to the table, because everybody thinks that, oh, you're going to be a physician or a scientist, rather than science is actually a huge part, and it's a wonderful knowledge base to have just in general, and it impacts on every aspect of your life. However, we have so many college students, we have many graduate students, postdocs, junior faculty who do not have enough role models, enough training, and we have to improve it at every level. So yes, we want to start, you know, the education very early, but we really must do this at every single level of mentorship, and it should be embedded in you know, in every single thing that's at Mount Sinai and many organizations. We bring in students from the community. So, you know, many places, institutions are in poor communities, and a lot of the children there, we are their role models. And so, you know, making ourselves part of the community, I think is also an essential part of this as well.
Laura, can I just add quickly to Yasmin's point, which I think is brilliant? Imagine the difference. It's not just viewing the diversity in science or learning the science, but it's the critical thinking skills that, if taught at a young age, result in the ability for an adult to listen to myths and fiction and sort that out from fact. And that is what we need more of. So at a very, very young age, I applaud Yasmin. It's an important point.
Could I ask a question to the questions? I see something there for the group, and to Megan, I know that you're going to address some of this. We want everything to be actionable. So this is a discussion today, but there will be concrete resources and tools that should be shared among the community. So it's not that, at least for me, we're not telling people what to. We're going to be providing resources, but we hope that being part of this network, you're providing resources as well. It's a community. This is what we're creating. We're creating a community that we're all tied together internationally to make this change at this time in history. So we will be sharing, and everyone should be sharing their tools and the resources to impact all of the actionable points of the declaration.
Carmen.
Yeah, I think I would like to take the opportunity of this point to say that this is the ambition of the ALBA Network, to be an umbrella in which many of the actions, even organizations and specific programs in universities, foundations, everywhere can be, and we can capitalize in what is being done already. Like, for example, Yasmin, with Andreae, we are establishing contact, and we hope to much more because you've been very much behind in implementing different types of actions already and elsewhere. So I think somehow my feeling is that we all agree that we need to synergize and also that being together is a bit of a kind of a contagion that can help a lot for things to happen. And I invite everyone to support the network, because we can be connected through the website and also through the emailing system. But I agree. I also think that indeed we are discussing many different actions, and as Megan said, it's important sometimes not to be too provocative, but we have to see indeed if we make progress, and maybe also reevaluate the actions if we need to do something beyond. I think we've been biased for many years now, decades, towards particular type of people, actions, etc. And I don't think it's bad not to be biased against the other part, but to make programs that make it that enable that people, that everyone is incorporated soon. Otherwise, it's too frustrating. And I think to many of the questions that are asked in the Q&A, asking about specific actions, mentoring, etc., we will follow up in ALBA. So stay tuned because we are going to follow up in all these different points and questions. And thank you. I'll stop here.
Yes, thank you, Carmen. So I guess now we do really have 6 minutes left. There have been quite a few questions in the Q&A about the declaration, and so maybe so for example, to what does it mean for institutions signing up to this? How enforceable is this declaration, and where is the evidence for various aspects of the declaration? So perhaps Megan, you could address that in your summarizing. I'd like to thank our panelists again for taking part in this discussion. It's been fascinating. I feel like we could all go on for another few hours actually, because there's lots to discuss, and there were lots of great questions. We do encourage you, let's do take this up on Twitter, if you follow ALBA on Twitter, and hopefully we will try and address questions if we can, and put out more information. So with that, thank you very much again, everyone. And Megan, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a really fantastic panel discussion. I'm only sorry we didn't have at least another hour. I'm glad it was recorded because I couldn't note down everything fast enough. Fantastic insights. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to just conclude by again, reminding everyone that this is the beginning, not the end. So I want to talk about the next steps for ALBA. And so I think first of all, as I've mentioned in some of the Q&A, I wanted to point out that in the crafting of this short version of the declaration, we also, that's sort of the abstract, and we've been working on the figure set and the data analysis behind the scenes. So we've actually have been compiling a large database of resources, both that provide evidence for studies and findings that are the underlying evidence for the barriers that we address in the declaration, and also compiling more details about best practices for overcoming them. And we will be launching those on the website soon, hopefully. And we also acknowledge again that we're just scratching the surface with this declaration. So we'd really like to continue with some deep dives, opinion pieces, ideally written by partners of ALBA, maybe expanding on specific aspects of the declaration, because most of these points and pages written and discussed about them. And we'd really like to use this as a jumping off point now that we've started that dialogue to bring attention to some of these issues in a very public way. When I say we, I mean also all of you. So anyone who's there, if you haven't yet signed the declaration, please do go sign. And you can also click then to join ALBA and stay involved with our initiatives and also help us set up the things that you're suggesting that we've also discussed, like a mentorship network and all kinds of things like that. Now for the declaration, and I wanted to point out that yes, endorsement at this stage is not binding. So that of course is how we managed to get over 160 institutional signatories within less than 2 weeks. But that doesn't mean that it is completely devoid of accountability. And I think Yasmin made this point exactly how I wanted it to be made, which is for those of you, and I'm seeing questions from people who are at institutions that maybe have already seen the declaration, and I know a lot of you are thinking, but my institute is far away from actually achieving the goals of the declaration. And that we wrote this to empower you to hold your organization accountable. So when you're sitting in your next meeting and you're really frustrated that things aren't going the way you want it to go, please use this declaration, point to it, remind the people in power that they signed on, that they believe in this in theory, and it's important to actually act on those beliefs. And it's not always easy. So we really want, we have space for individuals to sign the declaration. We have organizations. We want many more organizations as well. But it's not just, we don't want just the declaration to be broad and to have it expand to more and more people and more organizations. We also want it to expand vertically within each organization. And it should have an impact on the lived experiences of every individual in the organizations that have already signed on. So we'll try to come back and keep up with the organizations and the individuals involved and see over time if we have been making a difference. And as Carmen said, update and renew our initiatives for the future. I want to end just with some concluding words to point out that usually as scientists, we hope that our work will reveal some kind of universal truth. And when we publish a paper, we often hope that our contributions will withstand the tests of time and be long lasting, if not permanent. But in this case, it's the complete opposite. So we at ALBA want nothing more than the possibility that this declaration will at some point in the not too distant future become necessary or even rendered obsolete. Until then, of course, we all have work to do. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you for your support and your efforts.
Thank you, everyone. All the best. We keep connected and we keep networking. Thanks, participants. Bye.